This, what I'm about to share with you, is my official statement for Emancipation 2012. And this is as the result of some basic thoughts regarding the current plight and state of African consciousness ideology in this day and time. You see, Trinidad and Tobago is the first country in the world to declare a national public holiday for emancipation. This was done when August the 1st, 1985 replaced the celebration of July 31st, which was previously known as Discovery Day, paying homage to Christopher Columbus. But it is ironic, however, and this is the theme of this statement, that there is the suppression of African consciousness in Trinidad and Tobago. And this suppression of African consciousness in this country is inhibiting the expansion of the knowledge base of relevant information, ideology, and culture of African people. This suppression of African consciousness is taking place on two fronts. Firstly, there is a hostile, belligerent attitude against Afrocentricity and being proud to be black, emanating from outside the black community. But on the next front is an internal self-censorship, almost shame, that plagues the African psyche, that stops him in his tracks from celebrating his own heritage. It is almost as if African people are afraid to declare the glory of Africa and recognize that the blood of Africa runs through their own veins. This second front on which this suppression of African consciousness is taking place is a self-inflicted self-denial of a very important dimension of one's own being. Black people are made to feel as if they are doing something wrong by being genuinely concerned about the African community in our country. You see, this psychological state of fear, bordering almost on trauma, comes with the concern about being accused of being racist. Many people seem to live under the cloud of being accused or called a racist, and so as a result of this, many black people just shy away from black issues. And the consequence of this is that our history is being rewritten and the legacy of a people is being slowly lost. So black culture, often before it is even released or expressed, struggles to include a contribution of non-African races, whether real or imagined, in order to validate our culture. It's almost as if we cannot make a statement without first declaring, well, I am for the unity or the harmony of all races. We already know that. That has already been made clear. That has already been established. We already understand that the majority of the African community welcomes with broad open arms all other peoples from all other ethnic groups and all other races. But we tend to make that the major claim that tends to cloud the purpose of our struggle for liberation and upliftment and education and empowerment as a people. So we end up getting lost trying to force friendship into the doorways of others before we even launch a proper objective to ensure that development takes place within the African community, that the human capital is built and enhanced. So we confront this fear, and our history is being rewritten. And sometimes it may be a real fear, other times it could be our imagination. So, for example, There have been recent claims that the steel pan was invented by the Indian Trinidadian community, that the 1970 Black Power Revolution was an equal joint effort between Africans and Indians, that Dr. Rudranath Kapildeo supported Dr. Eric Williams in the struggle for independence. These untrue statements are going unchecked because many black people think that if I correct those statements, I may be accused or written down as being racist. We, the black community, exist using mantras that have now become cliches that offer a rationale of the non-existence of racism due to persons of all races going to the beach together, participating in sports together, cooking and eating together, and playing carnival together. And as nice as that is, as wonderful as that may be, it in no way adjusts or readjusts the ethnically imbalanced socioeconomic realities and political privileges that some ethnic groups enjoy over others. Nor does it address other pertinent race-based troubling matters in our country regarding crime rates, the prison population, land ownership, business entrepreneurship, family structures. By the fact that different races get together in the same spaces and enjoy the company of one another on a cultural level, this does not undo all of the injustices that are committed against persons of various ethnic groups. And the political climate is not free from culpability in this phenomenon. Take, for example, we have in Trinidad and Tobago several Indian politicians, such as Kamla Prasad Gosessa, Devon Baraj, Suraj Rambachan, Anand Ramlogan, Tim Gopi Singh, and the list goes on, who have a consistent history of representing the specific plight of the Indian community both in and out of politics. And they are to be commended for that. But when it comes to the African politicians, maybe apart from Fitzgerald Hines, you can hardly find one that has gone down on record making any statement on behalf of the Afro-Trinidadian or Tobagonian community. As a matter of fact, the Afro-Trinidadian politician, if he mentions the issue of race at all, is more likely to condemn his own people in a bitter, loathsome denunciation, especially if there's a partially non-African audience in front of him, for example, in the parliament. If a black man who's a politician says anything about the black community, chances are it would not be in representation of their plight or interest, but more so in condemnation and criticism. And so it is almost like a self-refueling cycle that opens a doorway for a plethora of injustices to be committed against the black community, and part of those injustices will be our own denial of our oneness as a people, our oneness as a family, our oneness as a nation, a cultural group, an ethnic group. You see, many African people in public life seem to believe that if they abandon their ethnic identity in exchange for a national identity, that they have a higher chance of being liked, approved of, chosen, employed, and if already employed, they may stay employed. And so a policy of silence is adopted when it comes to representing their own people. Look, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, in a webcasted message to Trinidad and Tobago in honor of the steel pan, in the presence of our highest government officials, the head of the United Nations, congratulated the Indian community of Trinidad and Tobago for the invention of the steel pan as our national instrument. Now, in the mind of the African citizen of this country, he wonders, in the face of such a heinous era of history. The African wonders if he might be being racist, if he acknowledges the falsehood of a remark like that. And so he opts to remain silent, comforted by the fact that we are all Trinbagonians, therefore it does not matter who is credited with the invention of the pan, for as long as Mother Trinbago is honored. And that kind of mentality is causing us to not feel hurt or pain when our youth are killed, when our people are destroyed, when our families are broken up, when so many of our black young men are filling the jails, ending up in gangs with guns and drugs, locked in a cycle of self-destruction and death. We don't see ourselves as part of that, having some responsibility towards our community, being mentors and guides for the youth in general, because we don't see ourselves as a community. And the onslaught takes place on so many different levels. For example, in some of our recent school textbooks, we have highlighted a number of printed statements by writers such as Wesley Furlong, Frank M. Porter, and Uric Narain that are either historically inaccurate or downright offensive to African people. But a lot of this goes unchecked because of the lack of sensitivity towards African communal self-respect. Imagine in our textbooks in First Aid in English, in the gender section, a question where you have to change masculine to feminine says the Negro had a pet goose named Joseph. And the correct answer for our African students to write is the Negress had a pet gander named Josephine. Frank M. Porter in Republic Readers, Book 3, in speaking of the different peoples who came to Trinidad, the Spanish came in 1498, the French came in 1783, the Indians came in 1845, the British came in 1797, the Chinese came in 1806. He says the Africans may have come to Trinidad in 1783. When the truth, according to our greatest historian, Michael Anthony, is that the first Africans came to Trinidad in 1592. How can someone, same thing with Wesley Furlong's social studies textbooks, how can they actually permit someone to print school books and then the Ministry of Education authorizes them to be in the schools of almost all the schools in our nation, in the desks of almost every child that does not even respect the African community enough to do just a little bit of research to print the truth about us. Uric Narain in his upper primary level English comprehension book, Unit 28, has a comprehension passage about a black man named Moses going and begging a white man for a job, and the white man tells him, "Get away from here, boy, I have no work for you." And then it says Moses was worrying about the 5 children that he left behind. Such disrespect, such disdain, such contempt for African people, and our children are forced to use these textbooks. And the newest one by Wesley Furlong that is about to be released in September, an English book that's called Top the Class in English for Standard 3. And in the passage on Emancipation Day, which we're celebrating right now, of all of the great images that you can use to represent African people, African culture, the experience of emancipation and all that our people have gone through, the one image that they print in the textbooks for African children to represent Emancipation Day and African people is a picture of Kamla Persad-Bissessor wearing an African dress. Now, clearly, there is no vigilance or sensitivity in regards to what the minds of our African children absorb in terms of that which will inspire their pride in their heritage and promote a constructive form of consciousness that can help develop ourselves as a people and also as a community. So, an Afro-Trinidadian may be more inclined to say that he is not an African, and if he does actually acknowledge the fact that yes, he is an African, this reality is almost entirely eclipsed by his national identity as a Trinidadian, leaving very little acknowledgement or recognition of his Africanness. And I say to us, as I close on this, when we compare the spirit of the African community in Jamaica to that of Trinidad and Tobago in celebration of the 50 years anniversary celebration, we see two entirely different approaches. The Jamaican community celebrates their African heritage in their general achievements. They're celebrating their African heritage in their independence, and understand that independence in Trinidad was a struggle that African people were engaging in. This is another part of the history that's being written. It was not that the African community and the Indian community in the 1960s had combined and came together to fight for independence. It was not like that. The East Indian Support Base and the DLP, under the leadership of Rudranath Kapildeo, were against independence. Even for internal self-government in June 1960, Kapildeo was against it. For the removal of the United States military bases, Rudranath Kapildeo was against it. And even on August 31st, 1962, Kapildeo gave a bitter speech expressing his negative sentiments towards Trinidad and Tobago becoming independent, expressing the concern that, well, now, in a sense, these people will be ruling us, as opposed to the British. And they made it very clear that their preference was to have the British continue to rule over Trinidad than the PNM. And so, in Jamaica, there is a different type of national pride among the African community there that the African community in Trinidad is confused over. We would rather take caution not to offend other ethnic groups who might take issue with the fact that we love the fact that we are black, so we prefer to remain silent on our African heritage so that we can morph ourselves into the national community. We sacrifice or exchange our Africanness for a unity and equality in Trinidad and Tobago that does not exist. And so I ask the question, how is it that Marcus Garvey is a national hero of Jamaica, but Kwame Ture is not a national hero of Trinidad and Tobago? Kwame Ture, born in Trinidad and Tobago, formerly Stokely Carmichael, who gave the world the phrase Black Power and popularized the statement Black Power, and in his establishment of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, took the name Black Power, the title, the term, the ideology, and that name, Kwame Ture, internationally respected all over the world. But he was banned from coming into Trinidad. And a follow-up question will be, would a man like Kwame Ture ever be a national hero in a place like Trinidad and Tobago? So in Trinidad and Tobago, there's more condemnation of race talk than there is condemnation of racist action. One is more likely to be accused of being racist for noticing racism than for practicing racism. Because the main persons who are accused of being racist in this country are those who notice it, not those who practice it. So the great Dr. Walter Rodney of Guyana said, whenever an oppressed black man shouts for equality, he is called racist. And so African people en masse have chosen to utter the self-rejection narrative. And we must now ask ourselves the question, which is more important regarding our history? To be truthful and affirmative, or to be dishonest but politically correct? Which is more important? To tell the truth and enlighten the minds of the masses of our youth, but offend some, or outright lie because the lie sounds good? Something for all of us to think about, black people.